Hello and welcome to notes number 14. I'm sure many of you are watching this. In these notes, we are going to look at inheritance patterns, which means basically how we get genetic traits. It's not always so simple. Sometimes we have different types called codominance, incomplete dominance, polygenic traits, multiple alleles, and sex linkage. Then we're also going to look at a pedigree to look at how these inheritance patterns are traced through families. So we just learned about the 7 traits of Mendel's pea plants, and we learned it very simply that one allele was always dominant to the other, the recessive allele. We learned that the allele for tall, capital T, is always dominant to short, which was represented by the lowercase t. Or another example was the purple flowers were always dominant to the white. So he always saw those certain ratios. But unfortunately, genetics can be much more complicated than this, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to go beyond the normal dominance. These are the exceptions to Mendel's laws. We're going to see different ratios of patterns here. So we're going to look at traits that do not show true dominance. And we're also going to be looking at some that are controlled by multiple factors. The first that we're going to talk about is incomplete dominance. When you think of incomplete dominance, I want you to think of a mixing effect. Okay, so it's incomplete dominance. Neither is completely dominant. So what's going to happen is a mixing is going to occur. So when we have a white flower, lowercase r, and we have a red flower, uppercase R, and we breed these, we're going to see that when they have one capital and one lowercase, what should, in Mendel's laws, just be red because it has the dominant one, in fact is going to actually turn out pink. We have a mixing of the red and white together. So a heterozygous phenotype, a phenotype with one of each, is a mix of the two homozygous phenotypes. So the most classic example that they'll give you are snapdragon flowers, which are the ones that you see on the right. So if we have big R, we have a red flower. If we have little r, we have a white flower. And if we have big R, we have a pink flower. Okay, so just to recall, in normal Mendel, if we had this, that would be completely dominant, and this flower would be red. Okay, but this is an exception to Mendel's law. So if you see something like this where you see a mixing, you know that it's incomplete dominance. It's not completely red, it's not completely white, it's pink. Codominance is very similar, so people usually get confused between the two, but the thing to remember is that co means together, or remember both. Okay, they are both together dominant. So what you're going to see is you're going to see both show up. So in the example previously, instead of having a pink flower, you would have a red and white dotted flower. So codominance is when both alleles are going to contribute to the phenotype. Both alleles are considered dominant. So it's not that one is not dominant, completely dominant over the other. It's that they're both dominant, so they're both going to show up. So the heterozygous phenotype, one and the other, like we saw before, if you had big R and little r, is now going to show 2 traits. Instead of a mixing, it's going to show both of them. So the classic example is a chicken, white and black feathers on a chicken. Big R means that the chicken would be completely black. Little r means that the chicken would be completely white. But if we have a heterozygous phenotype of one big R and one little r, we'd have a black and white chicken, not a mixing of gray like in incomplete dominance. So you have to keep those two separate. Multiple alleles is when we don't just have a big R and a little r, we have more than 2 alleles. The classic example is blood type. Okay, and what this is going to allow, because there's more than 2 alleles, is you're going to see a variety of phenotypes. You're not just going to see red and white and pink, or just red and white. You're going to see more, like blood type. You have blood type O, blood type A, blood type B, and blood type AB. So with blood type, the 3 types of alleles are I, IA, and IB. If a person has 2 I alleles with no A or B, they have blood type O. If they have blood type IA, or IAI, then they are blood type A. They just need 1 in order for it to be blood type A. Doesn't really matter about this one. And the same thing with B. It can have both being B or just 1. And if you are blood type AB, you have to have 1 allele that's A and 1 type that's B. So this gives you a variety of phenotypes, what they're going to look like. Polygenic, again, some people get those two confused. Polygenic is when a trait is controlled by 2 or more genes. So it's not that there are 2 or more alleles, but it's that, say, on chromosome 1, this gene has an effect on skin color, and on chromosome number 4, this gene also has an effect on skin color. The 2 of these work together. And the way to remember that is that poly means many. So many genes are involved. And this is also going to provide even a wider range of phenotypes. Instead of having a variety, it's going to create kind of like a continuum. So if we're talking about skin color, you'd have the whitest of white, right? And you'd have completely black right here, but you'd have all the in-between, all the shades of all the races. And here we have an example with height, right? It contains a continuum, or this bell curve, because it is controlled by many, many genes. It's not just one that tells what a person's height is going to be. So whenever you see this bell-shaped curve, okay, you have to know that this is a polygenic trait. It's showing the wide variety of traits that can be seen, or phenotypes. If a chromosome is on a sex chromosome, such as X or Y, it is inherited a little bit differently. So chromosomes that are not sex chromosomes are referred to as autosomes. Those are the normal ones. Sex chromosomes are the 2 chromosomes that determine the sex of an individual, whether you're male or female. So the sex chromosomes are X and Y. If you have an X and a Y, you are a male. And if you have an X and another X, you are a female. So it determines what you are. So sometimes chromosomes are located on these, genes are located on these chromosomes instead of just a normal chromosome, which is going to affect whether males or females get it. Okay. So how your sex is determined is based on if you get an X or a Y, what you get from your mom's egg and what you get from your dad's sperm. A female is XX, so in her egg she can only give an X. But a male is XY, so he in his sperm can either have an X or a Y. So if you look at a little chart here, here we have what the mom can give. She can give an X or another X, because she's XX. And a male can give either X or Y. So here you can see that basically there's a 50-50 chance whether or not you're going to have a girl or you're going to have a boy. So it's really the male who is determining whether or not you are going to have a boy or a girl. So don't blame it on the mother. It's the man's fault if you don't get the sex you want. So a pedigree is a diagram that is going to show the relationships within a family. So say we're looking at a specific trait such as red hair, we can trace that through a family. So we're kind of making a family tree, but talking about a certain trait. In a pedigree, a circle is going to represent a female and a square is going to represent a male. If we have a filled-in circle or a filled-in square, it's showing that that individual has the trait being studied. So again, if we're talking about red hair and I have a filled-in circle, that means a woman has red hair. A horizontal line that connects a circle and a square represents a marriage. So let me just pull up this. So here we have a female and a male. This horizontal line connecting them represents a marriage, or in today's society, it just represents that they're having children together. Okay. If I have a line coming down from this marriage or this union, and then I have brackets going down, this is showing their children. So it means this female and this male had a girl, a boy, and another boy. Okay, so whatever this trait is, say this, we're talking about red hair, this man has red hair and he gave it to his daughter. Okay, so this is basically how we trace who has the disease and who would get it. So this is important, especially in diseases such as autism. We can see what the likelihood is that you would have a child that has autism if you can trace it through your family tree. Okay, so this is just another representation of it. You can see that the only thing that we didn't talk about is if there's a half shaded circle or a half shaded square. That indicates that the person is a carrier of the trait. So say we're talking about red hair, you have to have 2 little r's to have red hair. So this person is just a carrier, so she would have a big R and a little r. She would be a carrier because she's carrying a little r that could possibly be passed on to her children. Okay. So these are really complicated to understand if you're actually trying to figure out what kind of trait it is. So you can actually tell from a pedigree if it's sex-linked or whether it's incomplete dominance or polygenic. You can tell all of that things based on how it's carried down. So that also gives us knowledge about certain diseases. And that is it for notes number 14.